The text came at 3:17 a.m. while I was fixing a broken valve 200 miles off the Louisiana coast. My phone buzzed against the metal workbench, and I almost ignored it. Clara never texted this late unless something was wrong. When I wiped the grease off my hands and read her message, my world tilted harder than the rig in a Gulf storm. Liam, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. Tyler and I are together now. We've already moved the money. Don't try to contact me. I stared at the screen for maybe 30 seconds. Around me, the rig hummed and groaned like a sleeping giant. My crewmates were either asleep or focused on their own work. Nobody noticed that my life had just exploded like a blowout preventer failure. I typed back 2 words, "Good luck." Then I set my phone down and went back to work. The valve needed fixing, and I had a job to do. But something cold and calculating had awakened in my chest. Clara thought she was smart. She thought 15 years of marriage meant she knew everything about me. She was about to learn how wrong she was. At 6 a.m., during my break, I logged into our joint checking account from my laptop. The balance showed $3,247. Last month, it had been $151,000. Our savings account was completely empty. Even the emergency fund we'd built for my daughter's college was gone. I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, maybe, but not surprised. Clara had been acting strange for months. Late nights at the gym, new clothes, a sudden interest in her appearance that hadn't existed in years. I'd seen the signs but hoped I was wrong. I clicked through the transaction history. Transfers to accounts I'd never seen. Cash withdrawals. A payment to something called Fresh Start Moving Services. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Then I checked my email. A notification from our bank caught my attention. A home equity loan had been approved for $40,000. I'd never applied for any loan. My hands tightened around the laptop as the pieces clicked together. Clara hadn't just taken our savings. She'd forged my signature to steal against our house, too. I pulled up a new email and typed a single line to my cousin Max back in Houston. Black Winter is active. We'd set up this code years ago, back when I first started making real money on the rigs. Max was an accountant, paranoid about everything, and he'd convinced me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. Divorce. Business partnerships gone wrong. Family emergencies. Black Winter meant Clara had crossed the line from unhappy wife to criminal. It meant Max should activate every financial protection we'd quietly built over the past 9 years. His reply came back in under 5 minutes. Already moving. Stay offshore until I give the all clear. Everything is protected. I smiled for the first time since reading Clara's text. She thought she'd outsmarted a simple oil rig worker. She thought I was just another husband too busy working to pay attention to details. Clara had never been good with details. That was about to become a very expensive problem for her. The rig's horn sounded, calling us back to work. I closed my laptop and headed back to the drilling floor. 3 days later, Max sent an encrypted email with his findings. I read it during my lunch break, sitting alone in the break room while rain hammered the rig's windows. Clara had been moving money for 8 months. Small amounts at first, then larger chunks. She'd opened accounts under her maiden name, Clara Westfield instead of Clara Dawson. The transactions were careful, designed to look like legitimate expenses. But Max was better at tracking money than Clara was at hiding it. He'd found payments to Tyler Grant, age 26. A personal trainer who worked at 3 different gyms but never held a steady job. Max had pulled his background, no college degree, no real career, but somehow he drove a new BMW. The home equity loan was definitely forged. Clara had practiced my signature for weeks, based on the paperwork Max obtained from the bank. She'd used my social security number and employment information to qualify for the loan without my knowledge. Tyler had a history too. 3 previous relationships with divorced women. Each relationship lasted about 2 years. Each woman ended up financially ruined. One ex-husband had died in a suspicious accident while Tyler was dating his ex-wife. I finished reading and deleted the email. Around me, my crewmates complained about the weather and talked about their own families. Normal conversations about normal problems. Nothing about my situation was normal anymore. On day 6 of my rotation, I was checking email when a forwarded message from Max made my blood freeze. He'd intercepted text messages between Clara and Tyler through a service that monitored our joint phone plan. "Tyler, He's been gone too long. When does he come back? Clara, 2 more weeks. But Tyler, what if he finds out about the loan? Tyler, accidents happen on oil rigs. Insurance pays double for accidental death. Just saying. Clara, don't talk like that. But the policy is for $500,000. Tyler, exactly. Plenty to start over somewhere warm. I read the messages 3 times. Then I screenshot them and save them to a secure folder. Clara wasn't just stealing from me. She was actively planning my death. The woman I'd married, who'd cried when I left for my first offshore rotation, was now discussing my accidental death like a grocery shopping list. I walked to the rig's edge and stared out at the Gulf. The water was dark green today, choppy with whitecaps. Somewhere back in Houston, my wife was planning my funeral while spending my money on another man. The cold feeling in my chest spread through my whole body. I finished my rotation without telling anyone what I discovered. My supervisor, Jake, noticed I was quieter than usual. "Everything good at home, Liam?" he asked while we waited for the helicopter. "Perfect," I said, shouldering my duffel bag. "Never been better." The chopper ride back to shore felt different this time. Usually, I was excited to go home, to see Clara, to sleep in my own bed. Today, I felt like a hunter returning to check his traps. Clara thought I was coming home tomorrow. My official schedule had me landing in Houston at 3 p.m., but I'd changed my flight and arranged my own transportation. I would be back tonight, 12 hours early. Max was meeting me at a hotel near the airport. We had work to do before Clara realized her husband was no longer the trusting fool she'd married. The Louisiana coastline disappeared below us. In a few hours, Clara's world would start falling apart. She just didn't know it yet. At the hotel, Max spread documents across the bed like a general planning a war. "You need to see this first," he said, handing me a folder marked Phoenix Holdings LLC. I'd forgotten about Phoenix Holdings. Max had set it up 9 years ago when my salary jumped from $85,000 to $160,000. Instead of depositing my full paycheck into our joint account, most of my income went to Phoenix Holdings. Clara only saw about 40% of what I actually earned. "The balance?" I asked. Max grinned. $12.4 million. I sat down hard on the hotel bed. $12 million. While Clara was stealing our joint savings, I'd been quietly building a fortune she didn't even know existed. "It's completely separate from marital assets," Max continued. "Phoenix Holdings has its own bank accounts, investments, everything. Even if she'd filed for divorce legally, she couldn't touch it. You set it up before you got married, remember? It's technically premarital property that was never commingled." I remembered now. Max had been paranoid about protecting assets after his own messy divorce. He'd convinced me to route most of my income through the LLC, paying myself a smaller salary while the company invested the rest. Clara thought I made $160,000 a year. I actually made closer to $400,000. "What's the next step?" I asked. Max smiled. "We spring the trap." The next morning, Max made 2 phone calls that changed everything. The first was to freeze Clara's secret accounts. The second was to our lawyer, Bennett Cole, who'd been waiting for this moment since Max first briefed him months ago. Bennett had already prepared criminal complaints for forgery, fraud, and identity theft. The home equity loan was a federal crime since it crossed state lines. The forged signatures were felonies. The theft of marital assets was grounds for criminal prosecution. "We'll hit her with everything at once," Bennett explained during our conference call. "Asset freezes, criminal complaints, and emergency court orders. She won't know what hit her." While they worked the legal angles, I drove to a coffee shop across from our house. Clara's car was in the driveway, along with a red BMW I didn't recognize. Tyler's car. I ordered coffee and watched. At 10 a.m., they both came outside. Clara looked happy, relaxed. She was wearing new clothes I'd never seen. Tyler had his arm around her waist like he owned her. They loaded boxes into a U-Haul truck. My tools. My father's antique rifle collection. Photo albums from my family. Clara was stealing everything she could carry, not just money. I took pictures of everything. Evidence for court. At noon, my phone rang. It was Clara. "Liam." Clara's voice was shaky, panicked. "Oh, thank God you answered. I need your help. It's my mother. She's in the hospital. They need insurance information, and I can't access our accounts. Can you authorize the bank to let me handle everything?" Just temporarily. I almost laughed. Even now, caught in the middle of robbing me blind, Clara was trying to manipulate me. Her mother lived in Florida and was perfectly healthy. I talked to her last week. That sounds terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Which hospital? A pause. St. Mary's. The doctors need the authorization right away. Can you call the bank? I'll handle it when I get home tomorrow, I said. I'm sure your mother will be fine. Tomorrow? Liam, this can't wait. She could die. Then you should probably be at the hospital instead of loading my stuff into a moving truck. Dead silence. I could practically hear Clara's brain scrambling for an explanation. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said. Sure you don't. Give Tyler my regards. I hung up before she could respond. Across the street, I watched Clara stare at her phone through the living room window. Then she turned and started yelling at Tyler. The panic was setting in. Good. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, sent me photos throughout the afternoon. Clara and Tyler loading furniture. A realtor showing up with a for sale sign. More boxes disappearing into the truck. The realtor was listing our house for $320,000. The property was worth at least $425,000. Clara was trying to sell it fast and cheap, probably planning to pocket the difference before I got home. Mrs. Rodriguez's final message came at 5 p.m. They're loading the last boxes now. Looks like they're planning to leave tonight. Perfect. Clara thought she had until tomorrow to finish stealing everything and disappear. She was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. I drove home and parked 2 blocks away. Bennett had called an hour earlier. All the legal paperwork was filed and approved. Deputies were on their way to serve Clara with criminal charges, asset freezes, and an emergency restraining order. I walked to Mrs. Rodriguez's house and knocked on her door. Can I wait on your porch? I asked. I want to see this. She nodded knowingly. I always liked you better than her anyway. At 6:30 p.m., 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up to my house. Clara and Tyler were loading the last boxes into their truck. They froze when they saw the police cars. Showtime. I watched from Mrs. Rodriguez's porch as the deputies approached Clara and Tyler. One officer held a thick stack of legal documents. The other kept his hand near his weapon. They'd been briefed about Tyler's history. Clara Westfield Dawson? The first deputy asked. Clara nodded, confused. Tyler stepped protectively in front of her, which was a mistake. The deputy immediately focused on him. Sir, please step back. Ma'am, you're being served with multiple criminal complaints and a court order freezing all accounts under your name. Clara's face went white. Criminal complaints? I don't understand. Forgery, fraud, identity theft, and theft of marital property. The deputy read from his papers. You also need to appear in court Monday morning. That's when I walked across the street. Clara saw me coming and her legs almost gave out. Tyler tried to look tough until he saw my expression. Hello, sweetheart, I said to Clara. How's your mother doing at St. Mary's? She couldn't speak. Tyler found his voice first. Who the hell are you? I'm the husband whose death you've been planning, I said calmly. Something about accidents on oil rigs? Plan B. Tyler's face went from confused to terrified in about 2 seconds. The deputies perked up at that. Officers, you'll want to check their phones for text messages discussing insurance fraud and potential murder. The deputies confiscated both phones immediately. Tyler started backing toward the BMW, but the second officer was already moving to block his escape route. Nobody's going anywhere until we sort this out, the deputy announced. I handed him copies of the intercepted text messages. The deputy read them, showed them to his partner, and suddenly Tyler found himself in handcuffs. Tyler Grant, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and solicitation of murder. Clara started crying then. Big, dramatic sobs that might have worked on me 15 years ago. Liam, please. You don't understand. Tyler loves me. We were going to start over. With my money and my life insurance, I said. Very romantic. The court officer arrived with the eviction papers. Even though Clara's name was on the house deed, the emergency court order gave me immediate possession due to her criminal behavior. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items only, the officer announced. Clothing and toiletries. Everything else stays. Clara's sobs got louder. 30 minutes? Liam, please. We have nowhere to go. Tyler couldn't say anything from the back of the police car. I felt a moment of satisfaction watching him realize his plan had completely collapsed. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature and planned my death, I told Clara. Clara spent her 30 minutes grabbing random clothes and crying. She kept looking at me like she expected sympathy or forgiveness. After 15 years of marriage, she still didn't understand who she was dealing with. The fake real estate listing was canceled immediately. The agent, a nervous woman named Patricia, claimed she'd been misled about Clara's authority to sell the house. She handed over all the paperwork without argument. Max arrived as Clara and Tyler were being processed. Tyler was going to jail pending a bond hearing. Clara was released on her own recognizance, but couldn't access any of her frozen accounts. Where am I supposed to go? She asked me desperately. All my money is frozen. Not your money, I corrected. My money. The money you stole. She looked genuinely confused, like she couldn't understand why I was being so unreasonable. We're married, Liam. What's yours is mine. That's not how theft works, Clara. You forged documents and moved money without my consent. That's called embezzlement. Max handed me the final piece of paperwork, a complete asset recovery order. Everything Clara had stolen would be returned to our joint account, which was now frozen pending the criminal trial. Clara climbed into a taxi with her 2 suitcases of clothes. Through the window, she looked smaller somehow. Defeated. But I wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Max called with interesting news. Tyler had vanished from jail after making bond. But he hadn't disappeared empty-handed. Clara's jewelry is gone, Max reported. The cash she'd hidden in safety deposit boxes. Even the BMW was sold to a chop shop. Tyler cleaned her out completely before he ran. I felt something that might have been sympathy for Clara, but it passed quickly. She'd chosen Tyler over 15 years of marriage. Now she was learning what kind of man she'd chosen. Can she contact me? I asked. Restraining order is still active. She tries to call or visit, she goes to jail. Clara was discovering that betting everything on a 26-year-old con artist hadn't been her smartest move. Tyler had done to her exactly what they'd planned to do to me. The difference was, I'd been prepared. Clara had trusted a man who specialized in destroying women's lives. I spent the afternoon cleaning house, literally, throwing away pictures of Clara and me, packing up her remaining belongings, erasing 15 years of what I'd thought was a happy marriage. The house felt bigger without her things. Cleaner, like I could finally breathe again. Court day arrived faster than expected. Clara showed up wearing clothes I didn't recognize, probably borrowed from friends. She looked thinner, older, defeated. Her lawyer was a young public defender who clearly wasn't prepared for the mountain of evidence Bennett had compiled. Financial records, forged documents, intercepted text messages, Tyler's criminal background. The judge read the Plan B texts aloud in open court. Clara's face turned red as her lawyer tried to object, but evidence was evidence. Mrs. Dawson, these messages suggest you and Mr. Grant discussed your husband's potential accidental death as a financial opportunity. Is that accurate? Clara's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head. That's not what we meant, Your Honor. Tyler was just. He says things he doesn't mean. According to these financial records, you systematically embezzled over $190,000 from joint marital accounts, forged your husband's signature on loan documents, and attempted to sell marital property without consent. How do you plead? Clara looked at me across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd married. Young, hopeful, trusting. But that woman had made choices that led her here. Guilty, Your Honor. The judge wasn't interested in Clara's sob story. 5 years probation, full restitution of stolen funds, and a permanent criminal record. She'd also been referred to federal prosecutors for the forged loan documents. Mrs. Dawson, you systematically defrauded your husband and conspired to potentially harm him for financial gain. This court has no sympathy for such behavior. Bennett had also filed civil suits to recover everything. The joint accounts were unfrozen and returned to me. The house remained solely in my name. Even the fake loan was reversed. The bank ate the loss rather than fight our fraud claims. Clara left the courthouse with nothing but her borrowed clothes and a criminal record. I felt something watching her go, but it wasn't sadness or regret. It was relief. Max and Bennett were waiting outside. Tyler's been arrested in Arizona, Bennett reported. Tried to run the same con on another divorced woman. She got suspicious and called police. What happens to him? Multiple felony charges across 3 states. He's looking at serious prison time. I nodded. Tyler would have years to think about his career choices. Clara would have years to think about hers. I sold the house 6 months later. Too many memories. Too many rooms that still felt empty without Clara's presence. The sale netted me $425,000, exactly what it was worth. With the house money and my Phoenix Holdings assets, I had enough to retire comfortably. At 53, I could walk away from offshore work forever. I bought a cabin in the mountains of Colorado. 3 bedrooms, large workshop, perfect for someone who'd spent too many years crowded onto oil rigs with dozens of other men. The cabin came with 40 acres of forest and a stream that ran year-round. I spent my mornings fishing and my afternoons rebuilding the porch swing my grandfather had made for the old family ranch. Simple work. Honest work. Work that nobody could steal from me or use against me. The silence was beautiful. No rig engines, no radio chatter, no drama. Just wind in the pine trees and water over rocks. Clara tried to contact me once through Bennett's office. She wanted to explain everything and work things out. Bennett politely declined on my behalf and reminded her about the restraining order. I heard through mutual friends that she was working at a retail job, living with her sister, struggling to rebuild her credit. The criminal record made finding good work nearly impossible. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty about destroying her life so completely. But then I'd remember the text messages about insurance payouts and accidents on oil rigs. Clara had chosen her path. I just made sure she walked it alone. The mountain air was thinner than Gulf Coast air, but cleaner. I was sleeping better than I had in years. My blood pressure dropped. My doctor said I looked 10 years younger. Revenge, apparently, agreed with me. One morning while checking email, I found a message that made me smile. A Canadian oil company wanted to hire me as a consultant. They'd heard about my experience and were offering 3 times my old salary for part-time work. I could fly to Calgary twice a month, review their operations, train their staff, and still spend most of my time in the mountains. The irony was perfect. Clara had tried to steal my financial security, and instead, I'd ended up more successful than ever. I accepted the consulting contract and sent a copy of my new business cards to Max. Phoenix Holdings was back in business, but this time the profits would be mine alone. That afternoon, I caught 3 trout from the stream behind my cabin. I cooked them over an open fire and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Life was good. Life was simple. Life was exactly what I'd chosen it to be. 2 years later, Max forwarded me a newspaper article from Houston. Tyler Grant had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud across multiple states. 3 other women had come forward with similar stories. Clara wasn't mentioned in the article, but I knew she'd probably testified against Tyler. Smart move. Maybe she'd finally learned something about choosing better partners. I'd heard she was engaged to someone new, an accountant who worked for the county. Stable job, steady income, probably wouldn't try to murder her first husband for insurance money. Good for her. I was dating someone myself now. Karen, a forest ranger who managed the district that included my property. She understood silence and solitude. She appreciated a man who could fix things and didn't need constant entertainment. We took it slow. Very slow. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. My consulting work was going well enough that other companies started calling. Apparently, there's good money in helping oil companies avoid the mistakes I'd seen on dozens of rigs over the years. Phoenix Holdings expanded into legitimate consulting. I hired 2 other retired rig workers and opened a small office in Denver. We were booked months in advance. The financial revenge Clara had tried to inflict on me had backfired completely. Losing her forced me to rebuild my life better than it had ever been. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well, living successfully, living without the people who tried to destroy you. I kept my grandfather's rebuilt porch swing on the cabin's front deck. On quiet evenings, I'd sit there with a beer and watch the stars come out over the mountains. Clara used to complain that I worked too much, that I was never home, that money couldn't buy happiness. She was wrong about the money part. 5 years after the divorce, I got a letter forwarded through Bennett's office. Clara's sister had written to tell me that Clara wanted to apologize. She'd finished probation, completed therapy, and was trying to make amends with people she'd hurt. I read the letter twice, then fed it to the fire in my cabin's wood stove. Some apologies come too late. Some damage can't be undone with words. Clara had planned my death for money. That wasn't the kind of mistake you made in anger or desperation. It was a choice that revealed who she really was under the surface. I was glad she'd gotten her life together. I was glad she'd learned from her mistakes. But I wasn't interested in forgiving her or letting her back into my world. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed forever. Karen and I got married on the cabin's front porch, with the mountains as witnesses and my rebuilt swing creaking softly in the background. Max was my best man. Bennett officiated. He'd gotten ordained online just for the occasion. We kept the ceremony simple. No drama, no elaborate plans that could fall apart. Just two people who'd found each other late in life and wanted to build something real together. Karen understood my history with Clara without me having to explain much. She'd been divorced herself, betrayed by someone she'd trusted completely. Some wounds leave scars that help you recognize similar injuries in other people. We were both careful with trust now, but that made our relationship stronger, not weaker. The consulting business was successful enough that I sold it to my partners and retired completely at 58. Phoenix Holdings was dissolved, its assets transferred directly to my personal accounts. I'd built something Clara couldn't steal because she'd never known it existed. All her scheming and planning had been focused on the wrong target. Karen and I traveled extensively: Europe, Asia, Australia. Places I'd always wanted to see, but never had time for while working offshore rotations. We bought a second home near the coast, a small place where I could still smell salt air and hear waves when I missed the ocean. But the mountains remained our primary home. 10 years after Clara's betrayal, I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when my phone rang. Unknown number from Houston. Is this Liam Dawson? The voice was older, shakier than I remembered. Who's asking? It's Clara. Please don't hang up. I set down my axe and leaned against the woodpile. You're violating the restraining order, Clara. That expired years ago. Liam, I just wanted you to know. I know what I lost. I know what I threw away. Tyler wasn't worth what we had. No, he wasn't. A long pause. Are you happy? I looked at my cabin, at Karen's garden, at the mountains that surrounded our property, at the life I'd built from the ashes of our marriage. Very happy. Good, she said quietly. You deserved better than what I gave you. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone for a few minutes, then went back to splitting wood. Karen found me there an hour later. Everything okay? Perfect, I said, kissing her forehead. Everything's exactly as it should be. That night, we sat on the porch swing and watched the stars come out. Somewhere in Houston, Clara was probably wondering what her life might have been like if she'd made different choices. I wasn't wondering about anything. I was exactly where I belonged.